every problem they're given with the dog, at some point I've heard of someone's vet saying, castration will fix this, neutering will fix this.
There are some countries where it's illegal to spay or castrate your dog.
Where do you draw the line? For me, I have to say, it's a really bad argument.
As if it's some miracle cure for your dog starting to be reactive and aggressive.
Hi, I'm Dr. Sab Cohen-Hatton. I'm a neuroscientist specialising in animal and human learning mechanisms.
I'm Jamie Penrith. I specialise in canine predatory behaviour, and I'm also a former police dog handler.
And I'm Danny Wells, and I'm a dog trainer that specialises in unwanted behaviour.
And every week we sit down to talk about the latest research in canine psychology.
And more importantly, how you can apply it to your own dog to get to know them even better.
Welcome to the Dog Scholar. I have a question.
You don't say.
I do say.
Do you know what? That's going to be starting. That'll be quoted. That people who follow this series, they're going to. As soon as I say that line, "Welcome to the Dog Scholar," they're going to be in the houses going, "I have a question." I'm very predictable.
Well, we talk about the importance of routine on this show.
Oh yeah, definitely.
There we go.
Yeah.
I have a
Be a dog.
question. I have a question.
Go on, what's your question?
Well,
What's your question?
does neutering improve behaviour?
That's a good question. That's
If
a
I
question.
neuter you, will you
That's
behave?
a question that I was done about 20
I
years
behave
ago.
just very differently. Yeah. Depending on my environment.
It is a good question.
Yeah.
It's a really, really good question.
And it's a question that the majority of dog owners are very confused about. So I think it's a really good subject to
There'll
talk
be
about.
loads and loads of dog owners sitting at home, listening to this,
Contemplating
watching this,
testicles.
thinking, all about the testicles, but genuinely thinking, you know, will this improve my dog's behaviour? Is that the route? What will my vet tell me? But what will science tell us? So,
Well, it's really interesting because we've all heard the stories about how dogs that aren't neutered or aren't spayed are more wild, they're more aggressive, they're high-spirited and strong-willed. But does it improve behaviour? What's your experience?
Well, you know, if you want to stop your dog licking its bollocks, cut them off. Yeah. You know, interestingly enough, as a dog trainer, I'm quite shocked at some of the stories I hear. And, you know, not pointing the finger at anyone, but some vets are saying some crazy things. I mean, it might be owners, you know, telling porkies, but I'm hearing a lot of things, every problem they're given with the dog, at some point I've heard of someone's vet saying, castration will fix this, neutering will fix this. And I'm like, where's this coming from? It might be the owners getting carried away, but, you know, is it a coincidence that a lot of owners are saying this kind of thing?
It's a bit of a, it's always been a bit of a kind of, dare I say, old wives' tale? You know.
No, you dare not.
Yeah. I feel like if you go in the back,
Sorry.
you know, the amount of
I take it back.
the amount of people that are telling me that this plethora of problems they're having with the dog, and the amount of different information they're getting from different vets, but most of them saying like neutering will solve it. I feel like if you go into the back of any vets, there's going to be a mountain of testicles somewhere. It's crazy.
What do they do with the testicles when they finish with them?
Well, I don't think we can answer this on this podcast. Maybe that's for a later one.
You were just saying then about whether it's some sort of like, you know, old myth, whether it's something that, you know, stands the test of time, as that this is the procedure that will that will resolve things. And I think just because you happen to be a vet doesn't mean that you're inoculated against beliefs, and you may go into, you may learn certain things, but you may still hold on to these beliefs and think, well, maybe it has, or maybe
I think as well, sometimes practices can just linger and not evolve. For example, you know, I remember when I started basic training in the army, we were running around the woods, you know, playing army, but all the wars were in the desert. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes you get trapped in a way of doing things, and that's that. And I think this comes in from, you know, you go back to like the early 90s, you should just kick your dog out in the morning, he'd roam around the streets and come back. And I think this sort of practice of, you know, neutering a lot of dogs started coming to, you know, control the breeding of dogs.
Well, that is
And
the
I think
principal purpose.
Yeah. Well, that I think it's kind of lingered around from then, when it was better to do it because they were roaming around and they were procreating.
Yeah, and the science moves on as well, doesn't it? Which is an important point. We only know what we know at the point that we know it.
Yeah. That's a brilliant thing to say. You paused then, but I thought that was brilliant.
Quite
Deep.
profound, very deep.
Yeah. What do
The
we
Dog
know?
Scholar. Remember, you only know what you know at the moment you know it.
Otherwise you don't know, you know.
Science telling us? What do we know?
Well, we will find that out. Yeah. We will find that out because there's a good thing. I found some studies on this. Not one study, but
Plural.
2 studies.
Plural. Okay.
2 studies.
Okay. But this has got to be. I would say that this is a topic that, you know, in all seriousness, it deserves research, doesn't it?
It has,
Sort of
100%.
something- yeah.
It's a big decision to make.
You're talking about taking away part of an animal's anatomy that's perfectly
That
healthy.
controls and regulates hormones. There is going to be, personality changes involved in that.
Yeah. There are some countries, some of the European countries, where it's illegal to, unless it's for health problems, it's illegal to spay or castrate your dog, which I found really interesting. I didn't know that.
Which countries are them, and can you get citizenship?
I think you're safe. I don't think anyone's going to chop yours off. Don't worry.
No. I have this unique talent where I can suck them in as well. So I'm...
You learn everything on this.
Yeah. So what are the studies saying, Sam?
It's a really good question. I'd love to tell you, but you just keep talking.
Sorry.
Bollocks.
Right, these two studies, one of them looked at castrated male dogs, the other one looked at spayed bitches to see what the change was on their behaviour. Both of these studies were set up in a really similar way, and they essentially worked out for each of the dogs that they were looking at the point at time that they were neutered, how old they were when they were neutered. And that meant they could work out the percentage of life that they'd had where they were exposed to gonadal hormones, or sex hormones, essentially. So the hormones that are controlled by the bits that were taken out through spaying or neutering. And then they also did a behavioural assessment to pull out any issues that the dogs might have had. So let's take the male dogs first. Yes, we've got two studies, one for males, one for females.
How many male dogs were in this study, Sab?
More than 6,000 male dogs.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. Now, contrary to popular belief, the research showed that neutering didn't reduce aggression.
Is that contrary to your belief?
It really is. I love it when science kicks in, and I have no knowledge of that, but I would suggest that through my practical experience with thousands of dog owners over the years. It doesn't. It doesn't. In fact, I go on further and say a lot of the times it's created aggression that weren't there before.
Yeah. And in fact, the dogs that were castrated early were actually more fearful and more aggressive towards strangers.
That's exactly what I'd say. Yeah.
And they barked a lot more as well.
Yeah.
So
there are some shelters in, animal shelters in certain parts of the world, not necessarily in the UK, but in other parts of the world where early spay and castration is a matter of routine, with the intention of, reducing the surplus population. It's interesting to read that the science is saying that this finding's on such a large sample size as well.
The other thing they found is that those dogs that were castrated early were more shy rather than bold in terms of their personality. So they were less likely to engage things around them without being afraid of them.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah.
Does it say anything about scent marking and humping? I've seen from clients that they have seen a reduction in scent marking if a dog's prone to do that around the house.
Yeah, it did reduce indoor marking.
Good. And what I would say, and I love it. I'm taking stabs here and seeing if I can guess this.
Hotter, colder, colder.
Stab stabs.
Yeah, stabs. Another one was obviously a dog humping isn't always directly linked to anything sexual at all. But dogs that are serial humpers, I've seen a reduction.
Why
in
would
that.
you hump cereal?
Don't know. Frosties.
Well, you just love your nice cereal.
Just got it going on.
Yeah. So dogs that
I have a thing for Tony the Tiger.
Golden Grahams.
Fucking hell.
Put the sugar puffs down. Step away from the sugar puffs.
Yeah, can you just keep the spoon? Dogs that were doing it excessively, I've seen a reduction in that from clients who've gone down that path.
Yeah, but what was interesting is that the kind of whole concept about your dog being less aggressive if they're castrated just absolutely wasn't true. And it is possible that during puberty, those sex hormones have a role in proofing the dog against those behaviours.
100%, yeah.
Yeah.
We talk about, I think I've had this conversation before about it, a style of opera singer called the castrato. Have you ever heard of them?
No, but I can see where you're going.
Yeah, they used to castrate men when they were young boys. They would grow up and they would have a male-sized airway but with a child's larynx or something like that. Don't quote me. It was something like that, but it gave them a very unique sound. And
that is so unethical.
They all suffered really badly and ended up killing themselves. It's interesting because I see this in dogs. When you're castrating young dogs, I think, the way I describe it to clients is, I remember as a kid, if you were coming back from your friends and it was a bit dark and you'd be like, is there bad men around? And you were a bit scary. And as you start getting older and you're growing into a man, you don't feel them irrational fears anymore. You just feel a little bit more, I'm okay in my environment. And I feel like when we castrate young dogs, you see this in dogs. You see them like an insecure youngster for for the duration of their lives, and they're more prone to, fearful reactivity.
Well, it could be that it's affecting the coping strategies that the dogs are adopting, so they kind of end up dealing with fear in a more overt and impulsive way. Because they're not getting those strategies. But although it reduced indoor marking, it really didn't help with behavioural management in the long term. So we'll go to bitches now. That was dogs. There was a similar study, and this one looked at nearly 9,000 spayed bitches. So it was a huge sample size. Now, the earlier a dog was spayed, the more fear and anxiety and aggressive and excitable behaviours were seen in contexts like being barked at by a dog that they didn't know, or the doorbell ringing. So early spaying, a bit more kind of anxious and a bit more vocal. Howling and chewing were the only things that seemed to decrease when the bitches were spayed, which is really interesting. It was the opposite in male dogs, by the way, and they howled more when they were castrated.
I'll bet they did.
I tend to think, the advice around spaying and neutering is far more, dare I say, ethical when it comes to bitches than it does for dogs. I've had people come to me with puppies who've had them neutered. Yeah. Whereas bitches, they say, let them get a couple of seasons out the way, and then we'll spay. And obviously there's a lot of nasties involved if you're not going to breed a dog with a female being intact, because pyometry is a big risk. I've seen a couple of dogs go down with that, and it's a horrible thing to see. And
just explain what pyometria is.
I'm not really sure how to explain that, but it's basically an infection into the female reproductive organs but it can be really nasty. I know of a protection dog bitch that someone bought, and within a month they come into season, and literally within 24 hours the dog got sick and was blind.
Wow.
And it's awful, isn't it? It is awful. So as a dog trainer, I don't force anyone to make any decisions. It's your dog, it's your choice. But all I can do is give advice based on the experience that I have. But I've not really witnessed much behavioural fallout from spaying bitches. What I have seen is decrease in drive, that wanting to chase balls, so to speak. Yeah, they're on the floor. It's okay. We can go there. And I've seen increased weight gain as well. You have to monitor food when you spay bitches. I've seen this is all. No scientist here. This is what I've seen as a dog trainer.
But it's interesting because we don't know if they're howling because they're actually more anxious and not
Where's
because they're.
I've got loads of points that I'm going to leave you go, and I want to hear about the science. I've got loads of points that I want to bring up on this.
We've got lots to talk about. If you were asking me on reviewing the data whether or not you should neuter your dog, I'd say it absolutely depends on why you want to.
Yeah.
If it's to make sure that your dog doesn't have puppies, then absolutely. But if you're trying to use it as a shortcut,
there is no shortcut for behaviour.
No, you need to train your dog.
Yeah,
those
100%.
are behaviours that you need to train, and you need to work with a really good dog trainer.
Which begs
especially fear and anxiety, especially that, because it can escalate into other things.
Yeah.
It's not a shortcut.
Which begs the question: why are so many vets recommending this? I'm not taking a dig at vets. Vets do a fantastic job, and it's the first point to call if your dog ever shows any sudden signs of aggression or anything that's out of the norm. You need to be contacting your veterinarian. But why are so many clients? My training centre, we're doing around about 700 to 800 assessments a year, and a lot of people are being advised to castrate their dogs at a very young age, and a lot of people have come to me with aggressive dogs that they've been advised to castrate. You were advised to castrate your dog by a vet, weren't you? We said we shouldn't have really gone down that path.
It's my biggest regret. And I knew the science, I'd looked at all the science, but I took advice from two people who I'd seen.
That you're supposed to trust, the pillars in the community, so to speak.
But look, it might have worked the other way, it might have worked the other way, but certainly in my dog's context, it didn't, and we had to do a lot of work for behavioural fallout. I wouldn't have done it again.
Whilst we can say we can look the other way, I think in this particular subject, the science is pretty concrete. It shouldn't have been advised, and you are not alone. I see a lot of this advice, a lot of it, as if it's some miracle cure for your dog starting to be reactive and aggressive. Why, if the science is so clear, why is this being advised a lot? It's interesting, isn't it? And I'll tell you something, going back to what you said, Jamie, this will give you a giggle. When my Mallies were young, I took them to my local vets, and they said that. I took them for their vaccinations, and they were talking to me. It was an absolutely cracking vet. And he says to me, do you want to get them booked in for neutering? And I went, why were the one to do that? I'm happy with them as they are. He goes, well, it prevents testicular cancer. And I said, well, do you want to take them off? Because I might get it as well. And he just went.
And you?
And he just went. And I could see the cogs turning. And it was, but what I found was, I went away with, and what I thought was, there was not much thought, but it was like, this is just, it's a practice.
Well, that's where I said, where do you draw the line?
Yeah.
But where we're trying to use that as a justification for performing a procedure, where do you draw the line?
It's very interesting.
What can't you remove from an animal based on the statistical possibility that it might become infected at a later stage? It is endless. But to do that where you're going to say, I'm doing that based on
to prevent
a behavioural issue, I'm doing it based on a behavioural issue. Certainly, because it's only the medical profession, as in the veterinary profession, that can do it. It isn't something that owners can do themselves. So, as a member of that, and I take on board, I too, a great deal of respect for vets. They do things that I'm well incapable of doing. Their knowledge of things is way beyond my knowledge of things in that field. But when it comes to addressing behavioural deficits or preventing behavioural problems from manifesting or increasing, then I think that you ought to be looking at the people who are actually involved in doing that and saying, in your experience, has the removal of reproductive organs or areas of reproductive organs resulted in a significant decrease in these behaviours that we're looking to do it for? I think we'd get an overwhelming no.
There was certainly something here about the impact of depriving dogs of those hormonal influences at that particular point in time. That deprivation clearly had an impact on their
moulds them into an
behaviour.
adult.
Yeah, and it might not be the same for every dog, because don't forget, this is a really large sample. So this is looking at generally what the impacts are. You're going to have variations within that. For some dogs, it might it might be absolutely fine. For other dogs, it might be a really detrimental impact. And it's working out actually generally what happens. What's the impact generally? Not the exceptions that sit within that, but generally what's the impact of taking away those sex hormones at that particular point in time. And it does have an impact on behaviour, but it's not the one that is part of the common narrative.
The problem we have is we've banned like cropping and docking, which is understandably, but is it okay to take some parts, but it's not okay to take others?
I mean, don't get me wrong, there are lots and lots of dogs that are in shelters that don't have a home. So controlling the population of dogs is a really important factor in this. And I wouldn't want people to be listening and think you should never neuter. But this is a really specific point.
Yeah, it's your dog, it's your decision, it's a personal decision.
Yeah, and this is about whether neutering will be a shortcut to behaviour management. And the research says that it's not. So let's just be really specific about that. Yeah, so there's something, isn't there, about the dog's exposure to those hormones during that period of time that affects the way that they perceive the world around them and the way that they respond to that. It's about confidence, that point that we heard in the research about dogs being more shy as opposed to bold. But there is something about then the way that that dog is interacting with the environment. And if they're interacting with it in a fearful way and they growl at somebody because they're afraid, and that person, as you've said before, goes back, and that creates space, the dog goes, oh, I'll remember how to do that.
And it all boils down to your dog's associative learning. If you're putting your dog in a mindset where they're going to perceive the world around them as a negative place and therefore have to self-preservate, then that's exactly what's going to happen.
I'm sat here and I'm thinking, if we were to say, let's say that a folklore comes about whereby there's an invasive procedure that you can do on the olfactory capacity of dogs. Okay, so if you reduce their amount to smell, then their ability to smell so much, then by doing so you reduce their ability to detect what they'd consider to be competing mates, competing male dogs. Therefore, you're going to see a reduction in aggression. Therefore, would that justify us carrying out that procedure? Well, what you would say is, well, we need the research to support it before we actually do it. We don't do it and then look for the research to support what we've done, which is what actually seems to be happening.
It's almost like putting you in jail while we look for a crime that you've committed.
Yes, it is. Great analogy.
It's a conversation of ethics, isn't it?
Yeah,
absolutely.
What's it like in dog sports, Danny?
Spaying's not too much of a problem with working bitches if they're really high drive. It can dampen drive a little bit. Male dogs won't be looked at if they're neutered. Same with I've heard of police departments taking dogs that have neutered before, but most of them won't look at them, will they? Most of them will say it's not fit for the purpose.
You do you want everything. You want everything that animal can be, you know, because if it's suitable for a job, it's suitable for a working purpose, and it's healthy, then you want that dog to be everything that it can be. You can use its you know, if it's overly aggressive, it wouldn't be a dog that would be used anyway. But that wouldn't be down to the fact that, oh, it's because he's got testicles. And nobody would certainly say remove his testicles and that'll remove you know, see a reduction in the aggression. It's just, for me, I have to say, it's a really bad argument. Ethically, what we're doing is that invasive procedure, however mildly invasive procedure it is, and let's not pretend that it doesn't come with risks. There are risks associated with any surgery, but we're doing it ultimately for a human purpose. We would rather that the dog wasn't like the dog is.
Yeah, the reality of the situation is anything to do with dogs violates ethics. We're controlling that species. We've created brachy dogs. We've created, you know, arthritic dogs through selective breeding. You know, it's all not
which
really...
is perpetuated. You see poor breeding practice perpetuated.
When we're talking about them bold dogs, the only thing that really needs to be taken into account is is it fit for purpose, and through like protection kind of sports and protection scenarios for police and prison service, what every single protection trainer, police dog handler, trainer, everyone will observe, there is a lot more fight in a dog that is intact than one that is neutered, generally speaking, meaning that if the criminal puts up a fight, the dog's more likely to stay in the fight than to retreat. And that is, you know, again, is it ethical? Probably not, but it saves a copper's life.
But
do you know what I mean?
It also reflects what the data reflects in terms of the fear and the aggression. It's actually they're more likely to be afraid when they've been castrated early.
Which makes sense.
What's a response? What can a likely response to fear be if not to aggress?
Well, exactly, and that's the difference. What we're talking about here with the working dogs is aggression that's trained in, that they have to be bold to do. They're doing that because they're in the fight. The fear aggression we're talking about is to bite to defend itself. It's a response to feeling fear. And that's a really important distinction in this. And you know, there's a lot that we can see from the data, and what we can certainly see from the data is that the castrating or spaying your dog early isn't going to prevent the kind of behaviours that people have commonly assumed, people will commonly talk about being prevented. It's not going to stop your dog being aggressive. It's not going to stop your dog being fearful. And so there is something to really think about there. If you want to get your dog castrated or spayed, just think about the reasons why. There are plenty of reasons to do that. Absolutely plenty of reasons to think about that, but a shortcut to behavioural change certainly isn't one of them. And we'll be back after the break with some practical tips for what you can do on this subject, as well as some listener questions. Welcome back. We've had some great discussion points. Let's have a look at what we can practically consider when we're looking at whether or not to neuter our dogs.
I think when we're looking at practical considerations, we need to look at or consider practical reasons why your average person with their dog would consider whether or not castration, neutering is beneficial for theirs in a behavioural sense. So there's multiple reasons, aren't there, why people might consider it or might have heard about it. And, you know, Google having the world at your fingertips and you can stroke your glass all day long. And
stroke your glass?
Like this.
Why would you stroke it?
Oh,
scrolling. I haven't heard that.
I've never heard that before as well. I thought you had like a little sherry glass.
No. I was thinking crystal ball.
What I would say is speak to your vet. You know, speak to your vet, but don't just be bound by your own vet, you know, speak to other vets.
You have to really understand, don't you, the risks and the implications, and not just from a single dimension. We're talking about this from a behaviour perspective. There might be equally valid reasons to spay or castrate.
100%.
Other reasons.
100%.
And unfortunately, if there's something medical and your dog's a little bit younger than you'd like, then that has to take priority, and you're going to have to deal with the behavioural fallout.
To
work towards rectifying it.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree.
A lot of clients, you know, they're advised to do it because their dogs have become reactive or aggressive, probably through genetics play a part in this. And those clients live a life of quiet desperation. They're ashamed. They don't want anyone to know, oh God, because of the narrative of you must have abused this dog if he's aggressive and this, and they're very quiet about it. They go to the vet. And it
must be really worrying.
It really is, and I'm sure you can relate to this. It's an act of desperation. I just need this fixed. I don't want him to be a risk. I don't want him to do this. And they make snap decisions.
It's a huge, you know, where somebody has a dog that's showing aggressive behaviour, it is a huge stigma that people, or, you know, it's very, very stressful for the owner, isn't it?
It really is.
And admitting it is very, very stressful for the owner. And it can be very tempting, you know, if somebody says, try this,
Yeah.
try this might be the thing. But I think where you're talking about problematic behaviour in dogs and saying that this will be a one cure fix all sort of approach, I disagree, and I know that you'd disagree, Danny, and it would appear sad that the science as well, certainly the science that we've looked at would disagree and perhaps even says to the contrary. There are multiple aspects as to why a dog's displaying problematic aggressive behaviour or something like that, including, the lineage of the dog itself, the parents, things like that, the environment that the dog was reared in, the learning history that the dog's got, all working together to form the individual nature of the dog. It isn't something that if I block that tap, that means that I've resolve that issue. There's a heck of a lot more to it than
There really is. There are other options. What I'm seeing now, I wish I would see it a lot more, is when people are experiencing these behavioural problems, the vets are referring, giving them chemical castration. So chemical castration is a way of testing the water, if you will, checking that how the dog will respond when castrated without actually having to castrate, and you can reverse it. And then you can make an educated decision on the facts. You can see and observe your dog's behaviour and make a decision what's best for you and your dog. Because I can take it off, but I can't put it back on.
But equally, there might be really good reasons to castrate or spay your dog.
100%.
If you're in a multi-dog household and you're introducing a bitch into that, and you really don't want to breed, then that could be a really good reason to castrate, because you don't want to have extra puppies. That like we've said before, there are more dogs than we have homes.
It's
in
like
the UK,
everything,
and
isn't
there
it?
is something about population control. But if you're speaking to your vet about castration or spaying, ask questions. Get the vet's perspective. Ask your vet to direct you to studies that might help you to make a really informed decision. But certainly if you're considering it for behavioural issues, I would 1000% agree with you, and so would the science, that if it's a behavioural problem, it needs to be a behavioural solution. This won't be a quick fix.
And whether you're asking your vet or you're talking to a dog trainer or behaviourist, if you sense that person's getting defensive over you asking questions, that's probably not the person that you need to be working with. Everyone should embrace further knowledge and want to educate themselves on the subject matter, especially when it's a permanent change you're attempting to make to another sentient being. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and if someone's getting defensive, then they're probably not going to be the person that can help you.
You can't undo it, can you?
There is an alternative as a country, as a dog-owning world, where we could actually look at, and I'm talking about as somebody who has bred litters of pups here, we could also look at it in a way of limiting the number of pups that are actually being bred.
Absolutely.
Rather than supporting and, celebrating the amount of different breeds, the diversity of dogs that we've got, the number of dogs that we've got. It seems ridiculous that we are okay with adding to the population, but having to actually take steps to help reduce it at the other end once we've added to it.
I think a cracking step towards that will be capping the price that people can charge for dogs. As soon as you start allowing people to charge thousands and thousands of pounds, breeding goes through the roof. And now, as soon as there's a demand, the quality for that demand can suffer. And in a dog world, that means we stop looking for temperament, we start breeding for aesthetics, and now you've got a lot of dogs with behavioural fallout. So I think, there's grounds for capping how much you can actually charge for a dog.
I mean, it's a fascinating subject. I think we could talk about this.
We really could, but unfortunately we don't have that kind of time.
We're starting to sort of sail our ship in that direction when really we're talking about...
Well, can we sail it to the listeners' questions?
Let's sail it to the listeners. That's a nice one. That's a lovely one. It's a ferry. It's a ferry, mine.
Yours is a ferry,
Let's
just be silent. Let's be silent. It's a sailboat.
There's a little tugboat in front of me there. I had to let them know. Okay, question 1. First question, a very good place to start. Well, it wouldn't be the same, would it? It wouldn't be the same.
I love you and your counting.
What is a dog's memory like? I forgot. How far back can they remember things, and how much do they remember?
Dogs are associative learners. They learn by the associations they make between things. They link things. They link outcomes with a response that they've made. They link an outcome with something that happened at the same time. So now that's different to a memory of a recollection, a memory of a time. I don't know the answer to that one without going and having a really good look at the research.
I don't know how you would know the answer to that one, because that's like a subjective inner world. How do you measure that? I guess from a neuroscientist point of view, you'd see certain areas of the brain firing, would you?
Well, you could do.
Recollection.
But there is a difference between memories and associations. So it'd be a really difficult thing to test Really difficult thing to test.
Again, we're going down the route of, is your dog aware of the future and the past?
Yeah.
And if we're, the science is pointing towards living in the moment, then what we're perceiving as memories is more likely, there's no concrete obviously, but it's more likely to be a series of associations instilled, isn't it?
I mean, don't get me wrong, you can still recall an association.
Yeah.
But it's that
It's
really
not the same,
It's how you define.
Oh, where's your red
memory.
coat? You had that on the other day.
Yeah.
It's a different world.
I mean,
isn't
dogs obviously have memories, but it's the dog lying in front of the fire remembering the activities from today, thinking, I had such a lovely time.
Oh God! Do
today.
you remember when I chased that rabbit and you couldn't catch me? It was hilarious.
Yeah,
It's not the same sort of thing.
Although there have been some studies done with cats looking at dreaming and looking at the way that.
Right, I was just going to say that if I was at home, that is what I would be thinking. I'd be thinking, hang on a minute, my dog knows exactly where that cat lives down the road. Because and I could think, well, that's associative learning, and your dog won't remember that when your dog gets home. And I could think, you haven't seen my dog kicking his paws and going when he's asleep.
Yeah.
And he's undoubtedly chasing that cat in his mind because of his memory of no.
Unless you've seen it, you just don't. We don't
How
know
do
that.
you know?
And that's as a dog owner, lover for my life. That is something I've always been interested in. I love watching dogs dream.
Yeah.
Like our Ralph, when he dreams, he's literally sprinting on his side. He's on his side in a gallop, and I'm like, what is going on in that head? I just wish I could put myself in his head for just a minute and just see what's going on. But I suppose as neuroscience evolves, I'm sure one day we'll be able to project a picture and see what's actually going on.
Well, do you know what? I'm going to get straight on Google Scholar after this episode and have a look, because I think this is a future episode in the making. What's the next question, though, Jay?
Okay, second question.
1, 2?
Ooh,
1,
this
2?
is a topical one.
Oh, is it?
Why do dogs, even ones that have been spayed or neutered, sometimes hump people or each other? For instance, I had 2 dogs growing up who were from the same litter and were both spayed, and they would hump each other. Was it a way of playing or to establish dominance or something like that? Now, can I just say that I've got a multi-dog household, and something that fascinates me is that I have male, female dogs in my household, and often what I will see, not just during play, but if one of the bitches who is entitled comes into season, the other bitch will hump her. And I sit there and I do think, what is the evil? Because I'm very interested in hoot at parties. What is the evolutionary advantage? What is the evolutionary advantage in that? And you will also see that when I think it's almost reflexive, okay, which is a behaviour that just obviously occurs without conscious thought, if you like, because if I think, right, no, stop it, and I go in and I separate the 2 dogs, the one that was doing the humping will continue to hump thin air.
Yeah,
will continue to
down. They jump on and
almost
hump
as though
your leg.
you've wound a
What
dynamo.
that kid's going to look
and
like.
then, you've wound a dynamo and then removed the actual key component of it, but it
They
keeps
look like
going
they're
until it
twerking,
winds
don't
down.
they?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
I'd be interested to see if there's
why
any
they-
science on that subject. I think all we've got is anecdotal opinions in it. So it can be sexual. I've seen dogs that show a different, more assertive body language
Dominance,
doing it.
it's happened in
dare we
dominance,
say
absolutely.
dominance? I can see that, but I've also seen it more of like a displacement of arousal and drive. I've seen that sometimes, like my males, they'll roll around and they'll be fighting, and all of a sudden the pair of them are on the floor.
Almost like
it's almost like a displacement of arousal. I think the answer to that is we're never going to know for sure. We can't actually pinpoint it.
I guess as well, it could arguably be that the bitch that's doing the humping may have more of a particular hormone in her body, in her individual makeup than others.
And
Who knows?
what's interesting is no matter how much training you do, it's like they just can't help themselves. Sometimes Flint's a nightmare for it. He tries to hump dogs, that'll give him a right telling off. And I'm like, what are you doing, lad? You learn, so he's like a genius. You don't have to teach him something once, he remembers forever. But yet you keep getting told off and you're doing this again and again.
I do wonder if it is like a reflexive behaviour, like, your Pavlovian condition. If you were to puff air in your eye and you blink, you wouldn't think, well, don't blink or whatever. I can't help it. It's just happened of its own accord, and maybe it is something that
It could be that genetics says you're just going to do this act, and this is just something you do to make to increase the likelihood that they're going to pass on their genetics. Again,
maybe if
in short, we don't know.
You could just go complete reductionist on it and go, well, maybe it just feels nice, and that's why.
Maybe it does. Maybe it does. Intrinsically rewarding.
Intrinsically rewarding behaviour.
I think
great questions though.
It is really good question. I love these questions.
Yeah, me too. I was just going to say.
I don't feel too much like a scholar at the moment though. There's no concrete answers.
We've
there.
got plenty
onus
of
is not
dogs.
us.
Yeah, there we go.
Plenty of dog, not enough scholar.
Yeah.
Right, well, we do love those questions, and if people want to share their questions with us, Jamie, how can they do so?
Okay, so at Dog Scholar Podcast on social media, if you want to get in touch with us. Alternatively, you can email us at podcast@thedogscholar.com.
I'm in the mood for some icks.
I'm in the mood for icks.
Danny, you must be in the mood for icks.
I'm always in the mood for icks.
Ick me, baby, one more time.
Ick, I love that.
Clever, these are coming.
Oh, look, we're on it.
They're coming in fast.
Karen, okay, we're laughing now. This is going to definitely set you off. Karen from Middlefart.
She won't be voted.
Yeah, Karen from Middlefart.
Middle.
Yeah.
Come on.
It's in Denmark.
Is it?
It's in Denmark.
Okay.
Google told me so.
People who continually bribe their dogs.
Oh, don't.
Do you know what? We
There's
could
a-
probably do a whole
I was going to say,
episode on
there's
it.
serious
We
parts of that
really
as
could.
well as jokey parts of
Because
it.
there's a
There is,
difference
there is.
between luring to shape a behaviour
yeah.
and then bribing so your dog will only ever perform a behaviour to
Yeah.
get the
So,
treat
yeah.
that you offer.
Right.
Yeah,
So-
luring, in terms of dog training, we'd say that differently. Luring and shaping are two different things. So luring would be you're luring your dog into a position to make an association. Shaping would be you're basically waiting around and letting the dog demonstrate, work it out for themselves. Well in, Karen, I think we'll get an episode out of this.
It's great icks, though.
Great icks.
But we're running an ickle bit over time here. So,
The Dog Scholar!
Tell me your mind isn't trying to think of another ick. Just be,
yeah, that's all we got time for this week. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please share it with a friend. And even if they don't enjoy it, maybe their dog will.
And as per always, over to Danny once again for his final thought.
Thank you, Jamie. And I think the science is pretty conclusive here. A problem of the mind is not a problem of the bollocks.
Sweet.
See you next week.